Okay, I'd like to speak about the special avodah of Rosh Hashanah this year. This year as opposed to other years, based on a Mishnah, a Tosfos, and a Medrash in Parshas Emor. What's so special about this year? This year, we don't blow shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And there's much discussion about that peculiar situation. Why was it that Chazal decided to absolve Tekias Shofar on the first day? And we're going to discuss possibly an answer to that question. And I'd just like to mention that the Mefarshim are full of all kinds of answers to a very famous question. The Gemara says that a year that you don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, by the end of the year, Klal Yisrael will be very upset because tragedies will befall them. Now, there are all kinds of answers given to that question, and throughout the years, there's always been people who have come to point out different things that happened negatively when we did blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and the possible answers to that question. I'm going to read a Mishnah, and I'm going to tell you over what the Medrash says about this. Yontu shel Rosh Hashanah shechal yos b'Shabbos. Okay, that's like a good start for this year. B'mikdash hayutaykim, in the Beis HaMikdash they will blow the shofar. Avalei b'Medina, not in the Beis HaMikdash. Mishachar of Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Hiskim Yochanan ben Zachariash yutaykim b'chol mokom sheyesh bo bezdin. He made a takana d'Rabbanan that any place where there is a bezdin, they're going to blow the shofar. It wasn't in any place, just in Yavna alone. There was a machlokes about where it was that he was misakin it, and this is the subject of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't blow the shofar. That's basically what the Mishnah says. Then the Gemara starts off and asks the question. This is like a classical beginning of a Gemara. Mino hanimili. Where do we come to have such an idea? Amar Rabbi Levi bar Lachma, Amar Rabbi Chama, Amar Yachran, Kosav Echad Omer Shabboson Zichron Trua. We say Zichron Trua. The Echad Omer Yom Trua Yelachem. One pasuk says that you should have a Zichron Trua, and one pasuk says that you should have a Trua before. You should have a blowing. So therefore, the Gemara says, Kam b'yontav shechal yos b'Shabbos. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we have what's called a Zichron Trua. And Kan b'yontav shechal yos b'chol. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on a weekday, then we have a blowing of the shofar, in fact. All right? This is as much as the Gemara that I would like to discuss. And the Medrash goes on to explain this concept. And what I'm going to be saying over comes from a smattering of different sources, but basically Rav Tzadok HaKohen discusses this subject, and I would like to offer the general outlook of the answer to the question. I'll just preface what I'm going to say with the Achroinim who answered the question which I mentioned. The Gemara says that if you don't blow Tekias Shofar in the beginning, so then you'll have a bad year. So it says those who are careful about Shmira Shabbos, that which they're chorid for Shabbos, that Shabbos shouldn't be desecrated, that is equal to blowing the shofar, and that internal cry that we don't want people to be Machal Shabbos is equal to the cry of the shofar, and even when we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos, we do blow the shofar on Shabbos. Just we don't do it with the shofar, we do it by the non-blowing, is much of an avodah as the blowing of the shofar. That's a very famous answer that's given to that question. And in a similar vein, Rav Rav Tzadok explains that the being Shomer Shabbos can achieve the same thing as blowing the shofar. Now, this is the subject which I would like to expand upon and understand. What are we doing when we blow the shofar? That's basically the question which is the heart of the issue. I'll just tell you that the Gemara says, why do you blow the shofar? So the Gemara says it's a Gzeres HaKosov. Even though the Gemara says it's a Gzeres HaKosov, I'll just mention a totally irrelevant story because I find that this idea is worthwhile to say over whenever I can. Sometimes people ask me questions and they say, I would like a halachic answer only. No hashkafa, no stories. I just want a straight halachic answer. So if I have the opportunity to answer them, I say, so then ask somebody else. If you ask me, I answer you how I answer you. You want to ask somebody else, you could ask somebody else. But one of the questions that I was asked, I would like a straight halachic answer, and I gave what I call a side answer. I'm going to share with you because I think it's worthwhile knowing. Somebody asked me, is it permissible for a person to kiss their sister? And I just want a halachic answer. I don't want to know any hashkafa. So I said to the person, I'm not able to answer your question. Because in history of Klal Yisrael, if you would like to know who goes down as the chief halachist, is probably the Rambam, right? You know, he is the man of the letter of the law. And on this question of if you're allowed to kiss your sister, the Rambam goes off on a tangent and says that it's not a good thing to do and all kinds of reasons. So if the Rambam, who is the man who always says just the halacha, says here that that's not enough, it's not in my power to go against the Rambam, and I cannot answer that question without giving over some kind of hashkafa. I think that's a worthwhile piece of information just to know in itself. And I would like to say one of the other places where the Rambam adds a piece of, we call it a drush, is by Tekias Shofar. Now the Rambam, at the end of all of his Svarim, the 14 Svarim, every Sefer ends with some kind of a piece of a drush. But in the middle of the halachas that the Rambam is talking about, very rarely does the Rambam discuss anything other than the halacha. In Hilchas Tshuva, the Rambam says, "Afa p'ki Tekias Shofar Gzeres HaKosov, Remez yesh bo uru yeshem mishenaschem." He says that Tekias Shofar has a remez, a hint, to this idea of a person should awake from their slumber and they should get on the bandwagon and do what they're supposed to be doing. Now, I believe that this is not just a Rambam giving you a side piece of information. He's explaining to you what you're supposed to be doing when you hear the shofar. And that this, I would say that those who, before Tekias Shofar, there are those people who look at this from the Goinim, 10 different things for people to think about what Tekias Shofar has to do with. And all of them have to do with putting you in a mindset different than your mindset a whole year. This is a very important idea, that Tekias Shofar is supposed to move you from your regular mindset to the Yom Hadin, to Brias HaOlam, to Matan Torah, to Tekias HaMeisim. There's 10 different things that a person is supposed to be thinking about when the shofar is blown, and those are all the same thing. They're saying, get out of where you are and get into the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to be in. All of those things are very basic ideas, concepts in Yiddishkeit, and if a person is there, they're going to be acting different. So the blowing of the shofar is there to cause us to act different. That's what the shofar is for. Shabbos has in it the same power. Shabbos is the day that's Me'ein Olam Haba. You know, from the things I like to say about Shabbos, there is a question that people that are non-Baal Tshuvas are always afraid of people asking them this question, and people that are Baal Tshuvas don't understand the question, and I'm going to share this with you. There are people who, I'll just share with you a radical case where I had this question. I have a friend of mine who works in Kiruv in Europe, and he approached me once. He said, I have a girl who lives in someplace in Poland, and this was like in May, and she says Shabbos is extremely long. You know, the Shkia ends at 9 o'clock or something like that, and she says she goes crazy a whole Shabbos. She wants to know, can she put her television on a Shabbos clock and watch television on Shabbos? This is a question that she asked this rabbi. And this rabbi in turn asked me this question. And I'm going to share with you what I told this rabbi. I said to him, what would you like to answer this lady? So I said, I'll tell you what I would like to answer the lady. I would say that as of right now it's okay, and when it comes September, October, when the days are shorter, we'll reassess the situation. So he said, what would you say? I said, I would never say a lie. I would tell her the truth. So he says to me, and what is the truth? I would say to her, you're not allowed to watch television on Shabbos. But the question which I have for you is, are you up to this question? The question of, you know, becoming a Shomer Shabbos person is a process. It's not something that happens in 1 second. Even though I've met many people that say, I could tell you the point and the one time that's when I made that decision, and from then on I was Shomer Shabbos. But even that, to get to that point where you made that decision, there were many pieces that had to fall into place to get there. So there are many times that there are questions in Kiruv that the answer is that it's usher to do, but that question shouldn't be asked because it's out of its space where the person is. The person has to realize where they are, and the person is not necessarily able to do everything. Just an example of that is, I was asked once, should I get people to be Shomer Shabbos first or to eat kosher first? So I said, whatever you could do. If you could do this first, then do that first. If you do whatever you can do, that's what you should do, because it's a process. And then I found out Rabbi Yasha said the same thing. There's a process, and not with everybody will it work the same way. You have to know who you're dealing with to know what to do. The idea that people say, this is the question which I've been asked, people say, isn't being Shomer Shabbos restrictive? You can't do anything on Shabbos. A person who was brought up from has no way of answering that question. A person who is a Baal Tshuva says, don't worry about it. It works out. Right? No, this is what I call a non-question. This concept is what the Chazon Ish said to explain a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which is a fascinating Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Pas b'melach toichal, mai b'masura tishte, v'al aretz tishan. A person should eat a meager amount and drink water in a very plain kind of a glass, sleep on the floor. V'ashrecha v'toivlach, ashrecha b'olam hazeh v'toivlach b'olam haba. If you do that, you'll have it great in this world and the world to come. So somebody asked the Chazon Ish, if I would live like that and you'll tell me I'll have it great in Olam Haba, I have no problem with that. But great in Olam Hazeh? How could you say you're going to have it great in Olam Hazeh if that's how you're going to live? And the Chazon Ish said, Al zeh nemar, tamu u're'u es Yeshuas Hashem. Try it out. A person who will live like that, they will find that they have more osher, more satisfaction in their life than the people who live in the lap of luxury. There are certain things that on paper they don't work out, And in real life, they do work out. And there's certain things that in real life don't work out, and on paper do work. This is the way it is. A person who lives a very simple existence, living with Gashmias in the minimum, his life will be more full. So the answer to this question is, why isn't being Shomer Shabbos restrictive? I would say the Baal Tshuva has a better answer than the person who is always frum, because he went through it. I don't think the Baal Tshuva can explain it, but he understands that this is not a question. He understands this is something that if you do, you'll appreciate it, and if you don't do, you'll never understand it. This is what's called an opportunity. Shabbos is a time where people live in a different sphere. Now, this halacha of Shabbos is a time where we live in a different sphere. I say this over all the time, b'shem the Ramban. The Ramban writes this in Parshas Emor on Rosh Hashanah. The Ramban says that a person who would have his store open and he does business on Shabbos, even though all of the business that's done in a store, everything is only a D'Rabbanan. But a person who's busy in his store a whole Shabbos is called the Mechalel Shabbos Midaraisa. And he says, why is that so? Because your whole involvement is an involvement of Chol. You're not in Shabbos. You're in a different place. And therefore, your whole existence, it's not a question of what infraction you did. You're living a Chilul Shabbos. Whether what you're doing is a malacha or not a malacha is a smaller issue than your involvement. And I would just say, there are many people that can be Shomer Shabbos and being Mechal Shabbos at the same time. They could keep all of the halachas, and they're not there. They're elsewhere. We'll just leave it at that. They're elsewhere, and they're also not being Shomer Shabbos. Being Shomer Shabbos is something which is done in your head. It's not done with your actions, and this is what the Ramban says. You can be called a Mechal Shabbos even though you didn't do anything which was a malacha. Now, a person who hears the shofar, that puts him in a different place. A person who's on Shabbos is in a different place. What does it mean that on Shabbos a person is in a different place? A person is not allowed to be involved in his business on Shabbos. Why not? Chazal say on Shabbos it's supposed to be Kamo kol malachtecha asuya. Everything is taken care of. And this is a very important concept. And I would just like to share with you a mashal. I have a cousin of mine who is a very famous speaker. He speaks on Torah anytime, all the time. And this is a mashal that I heard from him. He said a man gets married, and when he got married, he was in the middle of developing a business, a multi-million-dollar business. And very often, even in Shana Rishonim, he would miss supper, he would come home very late. And he told his wife that you have to understand this business right now is, it's being created, and I have no choice. I have to be, spending a lot of time. But it'll come our anniversary, I'm going to take you on a trip, and I'm not going to be involved in my business at all. And it comes the anniversary, and he books a trip with his wife, and they go off to some place. And there he is in the hotel dining room answering emails. Right? How does his wife feel? People say that really, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'd love to serve you a whole day, but I'm busy, I have work I have to do, I have many things I have to take care of. It'll come Shabbos, and on Shabbos I'm going to devote my Shabbos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then it comes Shabbos, and they're finding out all the Teirim, all the things that they could do that are weekday-like, in order that they should be able to take care of their weekday obligations and still be Shomer Shabbos. How do you think Shabbos feels? Shabbos was just cheated out of their day. Shabbos is a day that a person is supposed to be living Me'ein Olam Haba, and Rosh Hashanah is a time that a person blows the shofar and he realizes also that he's supposed to be living in a totally different sphere. The purpose of blowing shofar is to have the person move out of the weekday sphere and move into the sphere of being standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, I'd just like to share with you an answer to a very famous Rosh Hashanah question, and I believe that this is the proper answer to the question. We know that Rosh Hashanah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges us. And we know that when we blow the shofar, we usher in the din on Rosh Hashanah. I don't know about you, but I'm not so proud of my last year, and if I could avoid being judged, I would skip the whole thing. So why is it that we all usher in the idea of having a din on Rosh Hashanah? And the answer which is given to this question, which is very, very basic, it's worthwhile to be in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, even if it means that you're going to be judged. Because just the fact that you could be Roya Pnei HaMelech, to be next to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to see him and be attached to him, even though the outcome of that is going to be that you're going to be judged, the fact that you can bask in the glory of being next to HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes it worthwhile. The price is that you're going to have to be judged. When a person understands that it's worthwhile, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu moves from the Kisei Hadin to the Kisei Rachamim, because he understands that you want this relationship with him, and that will cause him to judge you differently. Why? And this is something which is very central to Rosh Hashanah. There's a very famous question as to the Chazal tell us, we learn from Mishmar, HaKadosh judges us ba'asher hu sham. HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges us as we are on the day of Rosh Hashanah. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges us on the day of Rosh Hashanah as we are now on what we did last year. So, how does that work out? So the answer to the question is, how much are you connected to that which you did last year? There are many things that people do, and where they are in life, they're not really connected to that part of their life. Just, I had a very strong relationship with a Rav in Yerushalayim for many, many years. He was drafted to be a professional baseball player by the Baltimore Orioles. He decided to go to Lakewood, and he became a very big Talmid Chacham and a very big Rav. I had a very strong shaykhus with him. Now, if you would ask him when he was 75 years old, did you ever play baseball? Of course he'll tell you that he played baseball. It's not, Now, does it have anything to do with who he is today? No, because he chose a different profession, a different way in life. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and doesn't mean that he's not going to have to give a reckoning on it. But the reckoning that he's have to give on it is different from a person who's still a professional baseball player. This is what's important. Rosh Hashanah is going to come, and we're going to be judged on Tavshin Pei Vav. But our relationship to who we were in Tavshin Pei Vav, hopefully on Rosh Hashanah, will be different than we were in Tavshin Pei Vav. In Tavshin Pei Vav, when we were, as the Rambam says, Shocheach es ha'emes b'havle hazman, people are consumed with what's called narishkeiten, stupidities. And I'd just like to share with you my mashal of this, and this is true for everybody. Where I used to live in Yerushalayim, it was very common, different people would get different newspapers, and people would sometimes go to their neighbor's mailbox, take out their newspaper, and read through what that newspaper had to say as compared to their newspaper. I was going to shul one day, and I saw a guy reading the newspapers of the different neighbors. I came back after Shacharis, and he was still reading the newspaper. So I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Nothing." Okay? The answer to the question is, yes, he was doing nothing, and as soon as he puts down the newspaper, he says, "I was really wasting my time." But while he was doing it, he was very involved in reading the newspaper. Many of us were involved the whole year in all kinds of things. When it comes Rosh Hashanah and the blast of the shofar sounds, and you say to yourself, where were you a whole year? You will say to yourself, I was doing nothing. That saying to yourself, I was doing nothing, means that Tekias Shofar worked on you to get you to be where you're supposed to be on Rosh Hashanah. And if we start off by blowing the shofar during these days in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, we should be zeicha to be oimid b'yom hadin Rosh Hashanah and be zeicha to aksiva v'achsima tova.